Hello, my name is Anna Geiger. I am a former teacher, currently serving parents and teachers through my blog, themeasuredmom.com, and also an online course called Teaching Every Reader. In today's video blog post, I would like to talk to you about fluency. What is it, and what are 8 ways that you can build fluency for learners in grade kindergarten through 5th grade and beyond? So let's take a look at what fluency is, first of all. Many people call fluency the bridge to comprehension, and I would say that's accurate because without fluency, students are not going to understand what they're reading. Let's take a look at the 3 parts of fluency. So the 3 parts of fluency are reading accurately, reading at a good rate, and reading with proper expression. So when students are reading accurately, they need to have 2 things. They need to have a good sight word vocabulary, so words that they can read automatically without thinking about it, and a good phonics knowledge so that when they get to words they don't know, they can sound them out at a pretty good pace and keep going. I have a whole video all about sight words, and I'm going to link to that below this one so you can check that out. I won't be going much into phonics in this video, but I will also give you a link to a page on my blog where you can download hundreds of free games and worksheets and other things that can help build phonics knowledge. So I'll give you a link to that. Let's move on to the other parts of fluency. So one of them is reading at a good rate. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times that's what fluency is boiled down to in schools. Like top down, teachers are hearing that you need to be increasing student reading rate, and so they have to spend a lot of class time having them read text over and over, and then they're timing it, and then they're checking each day or every week to see if they're getting faster and faster. I do think it's important to check on reading rate and improve it, but I think we have to be careful that we don't lead our students to believe that that's all that being a good reader is, that good readers read fast. There's so much more to reading, so let's keep it in the proper balance. If you're looking for what a good reading rate should be, nobody agrees on this, not surprisingly, but readingato-z.com has put together a recommendation for each grade level based on different things they've studied. So I'll put those at the corner of the screen here. Keep in mind that the first number is the beginning of the grade level and the second number is the end of the grade level. And then I'll also give you a link to their website where you can read more about that. But that's just to give you a ballpark figure of approximately where your goal is and how fast that students should be reading. Let's take a look at that last aspect of fluency, the one we're going to cover the most in this video, and that is reading with expression. The fancy word for that is prosody. You may also see that sometimes when you're reading about fluency. That has to do with reading in ups and downs according to phrasing. It has to do with stopping at punctuation marks or making your voice go up at a question mark, for example. And then also reading with expression, as in your voice might change depending on the character. You might read in a certain tone depending on emotion. All of those things come into play. So let's take a look at those 8 ways to build fluency. Number 1 is echo reading. Echo reading is when you read and your students copy you. Now, they may not necessarily have to see the text to copy you, because what you're really focusing on here may not be so much the print on the page, but what they do with their voice. So a fun way to practice echo reading is reading maybe a fairy tale or something they're familiar with and having them copy different lines from you after you. So for example, if you're reading The 3 Bears, you might say, all right, I'm going to read this and then I want you to echo me. Okay, so listen first. Little Bear said, someone's been sleeping in my bed too, and she's still there. And then they copy it exactly the way that you said it. Now, most of the time, you probably won't be doing it separate from a text. Most of the time, you'll be doing this during shared reading. And if you're not familiar with shared reading, that's when you have an enlarged text that you're reading with your students, and it's usually an on-grade level text. People get shared reading texts from all over the place. It might be a big book, especially when you're teaching primary grades. It might be an enlarged poem or an enlarged song. It could even be the on-level text in your basal. Some teachers, they do guided reading with leveled texts, but they still have a basal, and so they use that during shared reading. Just choose something that you can enlarge and that all your students can see. Or sometimes, perhaps, they each have their own copy of it, especially if you're doing shared reading in the middle grades. So echo reading is when you read and they copy. I would say go line by line and don't make it too long. As they get more familiar with the text, you can do choral reading, which is where you just read the whole thing start to finish together, or a section together. And they're following your pace, so you're all reading at the same time. So that's the second way to build fluency. So we have echo reading and choral reading. The third way is a whole class poetry reading. Now, the first two did not take a lot of preparation. This would be when you assign each of your students a particular poem, or you give them a choice and they choose a poem that they like. And they practice it during class time over a period of a week or two. And then you have an audience come in and the students take turns reading it. I did this when I taught 3rd through 5th grade. And what we did was I had some partner poems, and then I also had some regular poems, and they practiced it, and I helped them, stop at punctuation, make their voice go up and down, whatever was necessary, until they read it properly and interestingly enough to read for an audience. And the nice part was, because they were practicing to read for their parents, they had much more drive to read well versus if you're just, reading because the teacher said so. And so we had the parents come in, we had refreshments, the kids stood on a stage and they took turns reading in a microphone. And it was a lot of fun. You wouldn't have to go that far. You could just have, a younger grade come in, or another grade come in, or one half of the class could read for the other half, or you could have staff come in, like the principal or a secretary who's got a few minutes, or custodial staff, or cafeteria workers, anybody who has some time to come in and give them some encouragement as they read to them. So those were our first 3. The next one is student adult reading. This is very similar to the echo reading, except it's one-on-one. And this is something that you're going to do if you're a tutor, or perhaps you're a parent coming in to give the teacher an extra hand with a child who struggles and needs some extra work, or maybe you're doing it at home with your own child. I did this with a student that I was tutoring when I was working on my master's degree. As part of our program in the summer, we worked with a group of students that were in high school that were struggling readers, and one of the things I was told to do was help build his fluency. So what I did was I took some poems from Shel Silverstein's books. I think it was Falling Up. I'll give you a link to that below. I do recommend using funny poems for this activity because it increases student engagement and interest. And some of the funny poets that kids like are Shel Silverstein and Jack Prelutsky. So I'll give you links to those. And what I did was I read a line and he read a line, and maybe we sometimes did more than a line. It may have been like 3 or 4 lines at a time. Because in this case, I wasn't so interested in him copying me, but in him being able to read the words fluently. So if I made it too short, then it wouldn't be a challenge. So it was like 3 or 4 lines at a time. This was a kid who was over 6 feet tall. I'm 5'2", so he was way over me. He was a football player, big kid, into rap music. He was very cool. You would think that this kind of activity would not interest him. But it was so much fun to see how he got into it, and, kind of to himself, but as he started reading the words more fluently and it became easier for him, he was really proud of himself. And he said to himself, "This is tight." Like, he really liked it. And that just really, I've never forgotten that, because it just made me realize that something so simple is really important to a struggling reader. For them to hear their voice read something without stumbling every other word is a real confidence booster. And it also builds their fluency. Those repeated readings are important. So again, with that student adult reading, you're taking some sections of a poem or some other text that they would enjoy. You're reading maybe 3 or 4 lines at a time, and they're copying. And you keep going back and forth until they're reading it fluently without stumbling. All right, the next thing is an easy thing to do, especially in today's classrooms: record and share. So when you're working one-on-one with a child in a tutoring session, or when maybe one-on-one in the classroom, you could get out your smartphone and do a video recording of you reading a section, and then they copy, or just have them read a section of something for a while. When you record it, then you send it to their parents via email. So you can say, "We're going to work on this section and see how fluently you can read it, how quickly, if that's what you're working on, or how smoothly, or with whatever expression, whatever it is you're working on. And then after the 3rd or 4th time, I'm going to record it and we're going to email it to your mom or dad." And so you can see them after school and ask them if they listen to it. Let the parents know in advance that you'll be doing this so they check their email. But wow, what an encouraging thing for kids, and what a good reason to read better, right? We want to always give them an incentive to do better, an interest in reading over and over the same thing, which can be boring. And with the knowing that you're going to email it to mom or dad, or maybe even a grandma or grandpa, that's a really good incentive for them. All right, something else that you can do at reading centers or literacy centers is you could have them practice reading a text to a timer and then see how much faster they can get. So this would be one where you're working on rate. So since you may have two students who are reading at a different level or reading different things, that's fine. They can each bring their own text to the center, and then you have a stopwatch or something like that. So the first child reads, and then the other child, stops the watch after a minute or 2 minutes or whatever. And the first child uses some marker or something to mark where they finished, how far did they get? And then you do it for the other child. Then you go back to the first child and do it again, and this time they use a different marker to mark where they finished. And the goal is every time to read more of the page, right? So that in a minute you read more than you read last time. Something else you can do is one of my very favorites, and that is reader's theater. So reader's theater, I like to tell my students when I was a teacher, it's acting with your voice. So reader's theater does not require props or costumes or scenery, which to me I say hallelujah, because that was just too much work for me. I like that reader's theater just requires a script, and it does not require memorization either. In fact, I don't recommend that at all. The point is that they're reading from a page, taking turns just like on any other script, and that they're reading fluently and with expression. And you practice it many, many times until they're ready to perform it. And they can perform it in front of parents like we did, like I suggested for the whole class poetry reading, but you don't have to get that fancy, right? You can just perform for the other groups in the classroom, or again for staff, or for another students in another room, or even just for you, the teacher, right? So when you're doing reader's theater, I recommend, if you can, start with a text that's very familiar. So this may be a book that your students know that you have typed up into different parts. Well, a very popular one is The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. You type up all the parts and then they practice each reading it. You assign one child as the wolf, one child as a narrator, and so on. I remember doing this when I taught first and second grade and we had parents come in, so we worked on it for a long time. Finding those scripts online is tricky, mostly because unless they have special permission from the publisher, the people creating them should not be posting those, because that would be a copyright infringement. So instead, you'll have to make it yourself. One thing you can do is buy reader's theater scripts. I just created a set that I'm excited about and I'd love to share with you. It's reader's theater based on familiar stories. And it's for, I would say, middle first grade level up through third grade. And it's called, I'll give you a link to that below the video. And it has things like The Gingerbread Man, Hansel and Gretel, The Princess and the Pea, all of that. Each script has about 5 or 6 lines. The font is easy to recognize. There is space between each line so that students can follow along more easily. There's a little icon, a picture on the side so they can find where their line is. If you choose to do reader's theater with your students, I would recommend starting by reading it to them, and then maybe having them do some choral reading where they read with you. You may do some echo reading. Give whatever amount of support is necessary before you send them off on their own to practice it. On the other hand, if you have some very advanced readers, they may be able to start without a special introduction from you. You know your students, so you figure out a way to make it work. One thing that you'll notice in my set of reader's theater scripts is that I mix up hard lines with short lines. Some of them have more complex lines like a narrator, and some of them have very simple lines. And that's so that children of different abilities can work together on the same script. So I will link to that. I do recommend making reader's theater a regular part of your classroom time. Students enjoy it, and it's just a really great way to build fluency. The final thing I want to talk about, the 8th way to build fluency, is kind of a duh one, but sometimes we forget. And that is just give your students lots and lots of time to read independently and out loud, because that is how we can build that oral fluency with expression, reading out loud versus everything in their head. You can do this during reading time by having students do buddy reading, where they read with a partner, and then in that case, they're going to read out loud. They take turns. You can have them listen to a book on tape and read along with it. You can have them at home. You could have your child sit with you at the table and read every day after school for 15 minutes out loud. You really want to focus on having them read with expression so that if a character feels a certain way, you can hear that in their voice. You really want to work at paying attention to punctuation. I had some challenges with that with one of my own kids where he read very, very fast, but he bulldozed through all the periods. And honestly, if you asked him afterwards what it was about, he didn't even know, because his goal was not to understand, it was just to barrel through it. Well, the other day I had him read to me a book about the Civil War, which is an interest of his. And he was totally stopping at all the punctuation. He was very engaged with the text. And that was because we spent a couple months really focusing on stopping at periods. And if you think he thought that was fun to stop at every period and then reread it, if he wasn't stopping, then you're wrong because he hated it. But I knew it was important. And so we focused on that for, like I said, a couple of months. And now most of the time he reads fluently. So take that time out to stop and focus on the trouble spots. And one great way is to have a parent come in and you train them for what they're supposed to listen to and have the student read to them. Or again, if you're the parent, do it after school. So those are 8 ways to build fluency. All right. So we had echo reading, choral reading, whole class poetry reading, student adult reading, recording and sharing, timing it, readers theater, and reading on their own. So I hope you thought this was helpful. I'm going to give you another link to a blog post about building fluency, and I'll give you a few more ideas in addition to these 8. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to sharing another video blog post with you soon.